Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Gabe Laredo. I'm the program manager here at Leeway, and I'll be leading us through this session that's focused on the Art and Change Grant, which is one of the grant programs here we offer at Leeway. And I'm going to pass it on to our guest grantee, Zoe, so they can introduce themselves.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. As Gabe said, my name is Zoe Greggs. My pronouns are they, them. I am a cultural worker, visual artist, and burgeoning archivist and oral historian with a passion for elevating forgotten and invisibilized histories. Thanks. Good to meet you all.
Beautiful. And as we get further into this information session, we will check back in with Zoe. I have a bunch of questions lined up to ask them over the course of tonight's session, and we'll get to know a little bit more about their project specifically. So I am going to go ahead and share my slides. All right, so let's dive in and talk about who Leeway is. We are a local funder based in Philadelphia, PA. We support women, trans, and gender nonconforming artists and cultural producers who do work with communities, engaging communities at the intersection of art, culture, and social change. And we will kind of break down what that means throughout the course of tonight's session. I do want to really stress that we're a local funder, so we provide funding to artists who live in the region, in the greater Philadelphia region. In order to be eligible to apply, you have to be able to show residency in either Bucks County, Camden County, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, or Philadelphia County. Just want to be very clear about that because sometimes folks find us through, I don't know how they find us, honestly, but sometimes folks from different parts of the US or even outside of the US. But we are a hyperlocal funder. Our grants are also not for organizations, they are for individual artists or a collective of artists, right? But if you're applying on like behalf of like a business, that would not be eligible, or a nonprofit that is also not eligible. And lastly, our applications are available in English and in Spanish. I also want to stress here that when we receive applications in a language other than English, we never use artificial intelligence to translate them into English for panel review. We always work with, honestly, folks we've been working with for years, just trusted folks in our community that do translation work for us. And lastly, I kind of want to say that we use trans in the most inclusive sense as an umbrella term, really for anyone whose gender identity or gender expression is not conforming or different from their gender assigned at birth. Okay, so when we talk about social change, right, the Art and Change Grant is a project-specific grant that is for art for social change projects, right? And what exactly does that mean? So we're kind of talking about work that is impacting not just a few individuals, but communities as a whole. It can do a lot. Your work might have a lot of different impacts. It can raise consciousness. It can be a tool for movement building. It can be a way of preserving a culture that is at danger of being lost. Or it can adapt a culture to kind of modernize it, to make it more accessible to people. Like there are so many types of impact that the project you are applying for can have. Those are just some examples. In our guidelines, which B, if you don't mind, can you link the PDF guidelines for folks in the chat? In our guidelines, there is a list, a section of art for social change, art for social impact, and it kind of gives a lot of examples as to like what, some concrete examples as to what that social impact might look like. I find that really helpful when folks are kind of new to maybe art for social change or struggling to understand what we mean by art for social change. Two questions that I find really helpful to ask yourself are, how does your art create action and how does your art engage or impact community? If you can answer those questions, if the project that you're applying for creates action in some way and impacts and engages communities in some way, that is often a good tell that it's an eligible project and aligned with Leeway's vision. And then lastly, who do we fund and who decides? So again, the Art and Change Grant is a project-specific grant, and it is not discipline specific, right? You can apply for traditional mediums or non-traditional forms of expression. That includes DJing, that includes hair braiding, cosmetology work, drag artists, aromatherapists, right? Somatic work. So all of those, as long as you can make the case that it's an art practice, it really has to be framed as an art practice, then the work is eligible. And in terms of who is making the decisions, that's made by a panel of community-based artists and cultural producers. This does change from year to year. So if you're already familiar with Leeway and you're coming back from maybe applying last year, just know that it is a different panel each year evaluating that year's batch of applications. Also, I'm not going to stop on every slide, but there are a few examples of folks in these slides that are past grantees. I highly encourage you, if you would like more examples of past work that's been funded, to look at our website. We have a section where you can explore grantees across different years and across different programs. B, if you don't mind putting that grantee kind of search page in the chat, I think that's also a really great resource for folks. Okay, so now let's dive into the Art and Change grant specifically. Again, this is a project-based grant of up to $5,000. Actually, we changed that. It is just $5,000, so you can't request less. It's just a $5,000 grant to women, trans, and/or gender nonconforming artists and cultural producers in Philadelphia or Greater Philadelphia to fund art for social change projects. Okay. So now, Zoe, I'm going to pass it back to you, and I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about your Art for Social Change project.
Absolutely. So brief little overview. It's titled the Black Immortality Project, and the entire goal is it's seeking to challenge and deconstruct our westernized understanding of death and mourning through the Black American lens. So the final result is a multidisciplinary exhibition, which will also feature oral history interviews from Black funeral directors, death doulas, historians, and cemetery caretakers. The entire kind of goal is to uplift local graveyards as historical sites worthy of investment, building community, and celebrating the tools grieving Black folks have developed to resist state violence.
Beautiful. I mean, it's truly a multidisciplinary project. There are so many layers to the work that you just described, right? And I also want to jump in and say that this grant can be used in its entirety to fund a project from start to finish, but it can also be used to fund a phase of a project, which is what Zoe did. Zoe's Art and Change grant funded I don't know if it was phase one or the research phase of the project, but it was just a part of the overall work, right? And so if that's well, I guess let me pause here and actually ask Zoe, when you were looking for funding, did you already have the project in mind, or did you see the Art and Change grant and come up with a project in response to that?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because it was kind of both. I had started honestly just with a list of things that I was interested in regarding death on like a notes app on my phone. And I had been interested in applying to a Leeway grant for a while, but I think I suffered from imposter syndrome. And it wasn't until a friend of mine and a previous colleague was like, you've kind of talked about this idea for a project. You're interested in Leeway. Why not just go forth and try? And the application actually helped me a lot in really understanding my idea, digging in deeper, and then I could kind of build my project out based upon the questions. So it's kind of both. We kind of worked, I worked together with the application in a lot of ways, I think, to really create the project. And it helped a lot. I still refer back to my application, actually.
I think that's really helpful. I think sometimes folks aren't sure like where to start, thinking about how to build the project, but it really is, there are so many different ways that artists find inspiration or find like the kind of kickoff to launch their project, right? So I think that's helpful to kind of hear how you started to kind of build the idea of it. Now I want to take us through, you can still see my screen, right? We're on the basics slide. Okay. Um, so I'm just going to run through some quick numbers about Art and Change Grant, and then we're going to go through the application piece by piece. So the Art and Change Grant deadline this year is August 3rd, Monday, August 3rd at 11:59 p.m. Please, please, please don't leave it until the last minute. I know some folks tried to like hit submit at 11:59, and I believe it actually will not let you submit like once the clock hits 11:59. So please, even if you're rushing and it's a late night, try to get it in like in the 11 o'clock hour, but not like touching midnight. Um, Usually, we've been seeing a lot more interest around the Art and Change Grant. We've been getting over 100 applications each year. There's only one cycle of the Art and Change Grant per year. And this year, because it has jumped from $2,500 to $5,000, I think there's a lot more interest. So we don't know how it'll affect the final number, but it's usually over 100 people applying. And we are able to award 25 projects. Again, to be eligible, you have to be at least 18 years old, live in our funding region, which is those counties listed there. You have to self-identify as a woman, trans, or gender nonconforming person, and you cannot be a full-time student enrolled in an arts degree granting program. So you can be a full-time student enrolled in a non-arts degree granting program, or you can be part-time in an arts degree granting program, but you just can't be a full-time student getting like your BFA or MFA, for example. And lastly, the Art and Change Grant is for work that has not been done yet. So we don't fund retroactively, and you won't hear back from us until October, right? Decisions are going to be sent 10 to 12 weeks after the August 3rd deadline. And so in the application, we do ask for a project start date. That should be October 26th or later. So just keep that date in mind. October 26th can be the earliest start date. Now we're going to talk about another part of the application, which is your selection of a social change intent or vision. We ask folks to identify at least one, but no more than three social change categories. If you apply and you select five, you will be getting an email from me asking you to narrow it down to three or less. But it's essentially a list of the issue areas that are seen here on screen: cultural preservation and restoration, decarceration, etc., that you feel most closely align with not just like the topics or themes of your project, but the areas of impact that your project is seeking to address, right? So Zoe, I'm going to throw it back to you. You selected in your application cultural preservation and racial justice as your two social change intents. Can you talk about why you selected those and how your project created impact around those areas?
Absolutely. So for me, when it came to selecting kind of the social change intents, it was a lot more straightforward than maybe for some other projects. For example, I knew that cultural preservation was number one because I was directly trying to preserve Black histories through oral history collection, but then I also wanted to uplift burial sites and cemeteries, as well as this is an aspect of this work is definitely archival. So for me, that was like very straightforward that it would be under cultural preservation and restoration. The other key aspect for the project is really about racial justice, particularly thinking about the technologies that our ancestors have developed to combat state and institutional violence. Those were really the heartbeat of the project. I had to kind of ask myself, in general, how does this project directly benefit my surrounding communities? And what about preservation specifically? Um, is going to be impactful, but also draw folks in who might not necessarily be interested in like archiving and oral history and preservation. So I really kind of had to sit with the social change intents for a while. And while doing my application, it was important to me that every single question that you're asked in the application is kind of reinforcing those social change intents. I kind of viewed it like building a structure and creating scaffolding to keep kind of making sure that I'm returning back to the central vision, which are actually full stop. That was my last thought. Yeah, thank you.
I know, I think that's really helpful, like talking about building scaffolding around it, and kind of using the social change intents as kind of your guiding light, as something to keep coming back to in the application. I think that's great advice for people to hear, um, to kind of keep in mind that this project, again, is to fund art for social change work. And so you don't like let the social change aspects just disappear into like one question of the application. It really should be a through line in the project, right? And if the project is authentically centering social change, that won't be a problem, right? I also kind of like, you'd say that it was kind of that your social change intense, it was like a straightforward selection because of the nature of your project. But you still have like an analysis around why you selected what you selected, and like an understanding of like, okay, if I'm selecting cultural preservation, what is the culture I'm seeking to preserve or restore, right? Like you have an answer to that. And with racial justice, you have like a sense of like, okay, these are the like systemic issues facing this community, and this is how we're going to combat them, right? Like you had very specific answers to that. So just a great example for folks who are struggling with maybe selecting one or two or three social change intents and kind of not sure. Sometimes folks like don't know how to sometimes folks want us to define them for them, but we actually don't define the social change intent for you. We just offer this list for you to select. And in the application, we'll go through the questions in a moment, but in the application is space for you as the artist with the vision behind the work to describe, to explain kind of what the social change intent impact means to you and what it looks like for your project. All right, so now the next part of the application is just a quick short project description. It's a paragraph that gives us, it's kind of like your elevator pitch. It gives us a quick sense of who you are and what the project is. So we're going to see this echoed in question one, but it is different than question one. This is just a very quick who, what, and why of the project. It should be clear from the short project description what your art form is, who you're working with, and who the work is created for or with, why it's being done. And just to pull the curtain back a little bit, this short project description is really used as a tool during panel, so that we can quickly identify who we're talking about um, in the during the panel process. The next part of the application is the experience page. And Zoe, I'm going to toss it to you in a second to talk about how you approach this section. But basically, in lieu of an artist resume or a CV, we ask for 4 to 10 experiences. They can be personal, professional, or political experiences that essentially led you to who you are as an artist today. So we don't want to we acknowledge that there are usually moments in an artist's life that impact the kind of artist they are. that don't have like a degree attached to them or like a formal award or publication attached to them, right? Like there might be personal experiences that you want to uplift that really kind of let the panel know who you are as an artist. In the online form, you'll be asked for an experience and then a year or a range of years that the experience took place. I encourage you to really use that space. So don't just say like, I grew up in a working class family, right? Like, yes, that obviously had an impact on you as an artist, but like, give us a little bit more, like, and that kind of led me to develop an analysis around like working class politics or something that feature in my work, right? So I encourage you to use those two sentences, really use that space to don't just say like what the experience is, but like give the panel a little bit of context so they can fully appreciate why that experience was so impactful for you in two sentences. Easy peasy, right? And then after you fill out those 4 to 10 experiences, you'll select one of them as your highlighted experience, where you essentially expand upon it with more detail. You have additional space to write about one of your experiences. I encourage you to select the experience that's most closely related to the project you're applying for. Um, yeah, however you choose to kind of tackle that. So Zoe, can you share how you approach this page and what kinds of things you shared here?
Absolutely. And just a side note, if anyone faintly hears drums in the background, I live in Mount Airy and there is a street festival happening today. So apologies in advance if you hear anything. Absolutely. So kind of reiterating what you were saying, for the experience section, I made sure to interweave my professional and personal and artistic achievements centering significant moments to me. So I made sure that when I was giving an example, I was directly saying how it connected to the project overall. So for example, something that I listed in my application, and I actually went back to go and find it, was a kind of short 20-minute documentary that PBS did called The History of the South's Forbidden Burials. And this greatly expanded my understanding of the importance of graveyards as both historical records, but also as sites of revolution. Um, so I kind of also had to sit and ask myself for a moment as I was writing in about the experience, what about the specific, whether it's an article, a podcast, a video, a book, or an experience, really stuck with me? And how did it directly contribute to uh, the project that I'm proposing? I think if you're unsure about how it connects, I might scrap it or maybe just put it to the side. Um, Two, for me, it was just like extensively writing a list out and then just taking out stuff that I didn't really feel like was as strong. I actually did multiple iterations, multiple drafts of the application. So it kind of helps to just like dump all your ideas in a document and then refine from there.
Great advice. I think also when you're talking about doing multiple drafts and kind of throwing stuff out and then taking stuff away and doing that edit, you're kind of like curating your application, right? Like I've heard other artists talk about this application and talk about like choreographing it actually. And so it might be helpful to put yourself in the panel's shoes. Like they don't know you, they don't know your artwork, they're not going to see work samples in this application. So that might be a helpful lens to kind of like reread your application through to make sure, that it's cohesive and coherent, but also that it's telling a story, right? And part of that story is like who you are as an artist. And so the experience page is really where the panel starts to get to know you, and also where they might start to root for you, right? Especially during panel deliberations, where there's limited funds, limited resources. Sometimes the experience page can help a panel like fall in love with the project, honestly. Okay, now I'm going to take us through the 5 questions. if you are not new to Leeway and you've seen this before, yes, we no longer have 6 questions here, and we no longer have a change partner requirement, and so it's whittled down to 5 questions. The first question is summarize your Art for Social Change project. Consider the who, what, when, and where of the project. Please give us a sense of the timeliness of the project, right? And what does that mean? And how is that different from the short project description, right? Well, one, you're going to have a little bit more space to write here. But the panel should also get a sense of the full scope of the project here. So your full project details should be here. They should understand like the timeline, the communities involved. What does the artwork look like? What is being produced, right? All of those details should be summarized in question 1. And then why does it matter that it happens now, right? So you're kind of giving a sense of like, that's what we mean by timeliness of the project, of why is it important that it takes place now? Is there any urgency that you want to uplift around the timing of your project? You would do that here in question 1. Question 2 is why is this project important to you and how will it utilize and or grow your skills, relationships, and experiences? This really is about, there's no right or wrong way to answer this one. It's really about you as an artist, and why it matters to you, right? This is kind of where you can show your passion and excitement for this project, and also talk about how it will help your own development as an artist, right? Question 3 has to do with the social change intents that you selected earlier in the application. So what are the goals of this project? How will the art create action, particularly around the social change intents you identified earlier as part of the application, right? I think these questions actually, I didn't summarize all of these in red font because I think they're pretty clear. You want to outline your goals, your project goals, and you want to outline what is the impact that you hope your project has, right? Around the social change intents that you selected. Number 4 is, again, this one's kind of about you as an artist. Define your community. What is your relationship to the audiences or communities you will work with on this project? And how does your identity or who you are play a role in this? So questions 4 and 5 have to do with the communities involved in the project, but question 4 is really about your identity, and what your relationship to the community is. And so you might be doing a project with a community that you are intimately familiar with. Maybe you are born and raised in Philly and you're in the same neighborhood you grew up in, and you're doing a project that engages your neighbors. That is where you would kind of talk about that relationship here and say, like, I'm the best person to do this work. I'm well situated to do this work. I have deep connections that are going to help me get this work done, right? That's something you could write about in 4. Alternatively, you can say like, I'm actually newer to this community, to the community that I'm engaging with through this project. And then talk about like why you want to engage with that community, how you're going to engage with that community. What does it look like to start building trust in a community that's not your own, right? And so that kind of relationship is what you would talk about in question 4. And question 5 is really about what does the community engagement of the project look like? So 5 is how does the project engage the audiences or communities you are working with? If your project takes place outside of the Greater Philadelphia region, explain how you will make a connection to the region and engage communities here. How is collective or community care or accountability built into this project? So really here the panel wants to get a sense of like, okay, I'm a part of your audience. What does it look like for me to be an audience to your work or a participant to your work? How am I going to be taken care of? What kinds of things am I going to be doing? Do I have a say in like what is happening here? Like what is my level of um, I guess like autonomy in a sense and like engagement within this project? Your project does not have to entirely take place within the funding region. But if part of it takes place outside of the funding region, definitely you want to explain how it has impact here, right? That's a really important part of this application is the impact that your project is going to have locally. And so again, it is fine if part of your project does not take place in the Philadelphia region, but it does have to come back to the Philadelphia region in some way, right? That might be a workshop, that might be an exhibition that travels. There are so many different ways that might look, but it does have to come back in some way and impact communities here in some way. Okay, Zoe. I know that some of these questions are a little bit different from when you applied, but can you talk about how you approached the 6 questions and what your process for answering these questions was?
Absolutely. Prior to really answering any of the questions, I had to ask myself a few questions of my own. So the first thing that I asked was what was driving me to create this project and why was it important? And once I could answer that, I could then directly kind of create a list of goals to include under what are the goals of this project. And that would also reiterate the social change aspect. I then asked myself, could I define who the audience was and what they would gain from the oral histories and exhibition? So this took, honestly, it took days. And it was just bullet pointed notes. And I would refine again, and then use that as a basis for the application questions where I could expand on that in a lot of ways. So I interwove my research. I had already kind of begun researching death studies in general and local cemeteries, as well as significant historical events I included in my application. These were only used to underscore the project's relevance. So it wasn't like I was kind of trying to write an academic paper. It was more that I was trying to ground my project in history and why it was important to occur in this given moment, as well as my project's overarching goals. And those goals I was able to create from the questions I asked myself, but also from my first draft of answering these leeway questions really helped me define things. So I kind of viewed this whole process, at least for me, as like molding a block of clay. And over time, I was really able to uh, mold it to a shape that I felt confident in, and really directly was in line with what the Leeway Foundation is doing.
And I think when your application, I remember, felt very well researched. Um, and I and that doesn't necessarily mean it has to seem academic, right? But I mean it more to say that like your interest for the project really shone through in the application. And I think that is a really important aspect because if you're excited about it, then that'll help the panel get excited about it as well, right? If you really hone in on what your vision is and help the panel see that vision, then they start believing in that vision, right? Um, and so, yeah. That's really lovely advice for folks. Um, okay, the next part of the application is the project budget. So again, this is a $5,000 grant. It does not have to be the only source of funding for your project. It can definitely fund a part of your project. But the project budget section asks you to outline what this $5,000 specifically would fund. Um, Everything that you write in the project budget section should not come as a surprise at this point in the application. So it should be connected to what you wrote about in your project description section, right? If like you're talking about like a film project and all of a sudden you're talking about paintbrushes in the project budget, it's going to throw the panel off a little bit, right? And so just make sure that those things correspond. The budget, it doesn't have to be every single thing. It doesn't have to be paintbrush, paint, drop cloth. It can just be painting supplies, right? you can kind of put things in buckets in your budget. There's only like 10 lines anyway, so so definitely like bundle things in there if you can. And lastly, we're so excited that this award amount went up. Again, it used to be $2,500 and now it's $5,000. But we used to like wholeheartedly say to applicants, like, pay yourself and pay others, even though it was much harder to do on $2,500, right? But now that it's raised, I can with a little bit more confidence say, please pay yourself, please pay others, as part of your budget, right? It does not have to be used strictly for materials. It can be used to subcontract out some of the work, hire help, hire people for their expertise, etc., right? There's so many things that can be part of your budget. Zoe, can you talk to us a little bit about, again, you applied for a phase of a project. So can you talk a little bit about how you put your project budget together?
So the first thing I did, as you can probably tell from all of my answers to the previous questions, was make a list. So I made a list of everything that I would need for the project's first phase, even if it was something really granular. So what I included in the budget was even subscriptions to newsletters that would curate grant opportunities. That I included in there, as well as stipends for research interviewees. Part of the first phase of my project, I was performing research interviews, which were about an hour long, with Black historians, as well as cemetery caretakers and death doulas, so that I would have some basis of knowledge before moving to the second step. I didn't want to go in um, with minimal understanding of what this entire project centers around. The actual amount for research interviewees was where most of my project budget went to. But I also wanted to cover transportation costs. You know, if I'm visiting cemetery sites, I want to make sure that I can cover the cost of gas. So it sounds very simple, but it is incredibly helpful just to first draft out what you think you might need financial coverage for. And then kind of as my answer to my one of the previous questions, also scrapping out aspects that might not be as important for the budget, especially if you're going over, in this case, the $5,000 mark.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah, I think that's great advice. No notes. Make a list. Make lots of lists. Lastly, this is the last part of the application and it's optional. Again, we no longer require a change partner, someone who is unpaid who will support your project. That requirement has been eliminated entirely, but we still do give you the option of of having someone show their support for you and for the project in some way, right? So what we've done is in the online application or the hard copy application, right? Um, we offer for you to upload a letter that someone writes. Like if they just gave you the letter and you have it, you can upload it yourself, or you can assign someone to complete a reference form. Um, that happens via Submittable, but that person does not need a Submittable login. They just need access to their email. Um, and then from in that form that they get a link to in their email, they'll have the option of uploading their own letter in whatever format they've written it in, or they can answer just two questions as part of the form, which is what is your relationship to the project and the applicant, and why do you believe the applicant is well suited to do the project? Again, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. They're just offering their support, right? Who that person is, consider who that person is, what the relationship to the project is, if they're involved in the project in some way. Again, it's optional, but it might be helpful to include a letter of support in a few circumstances. This is pulled right from the guidelines, but if your project engages a community that you're not personally a part of, it might go a long way to have a letter of support from someone in the community saying like, oh, like I trust this person, I know this person, I know that they'll be able to carry out what they say they're going to carry out. If this project represents a new direction in your practice, so let's say you're a media maker, but now you want to go into, I don't know, mural painting. Um, why maybe you can have a letter of support from someone kind of saying like, oh, like they're definitely invested in this work and this new direction of the work because of X, Y, and Z reasons, right? And lastly, if you are partnered with a community organization or an individual that is giving a lot of support to your project, they might just want to express that they're invested in the work, right? So it might be a venue that has offered their space to you to use. They want to say like, yes, like we're offering this because we like believe in the work and we want to support the work, and that's why. Or it might be, yeah, someone lending their expertise in a certain way that wants to support the work. So again, optional, but that is something new that we're accepting this year. And yeah, and that brings us pretty much to the end. Before we stop recording and take questions, I do just want to let folks know that Leeway staff offers one-on-one applicant support to anyone who's interested. The first place I would direct you to is our Luma. That's luma.com/Leeway Foundation. That's where you registered for this session via Luma, but you can also register for the one-on-one applicant supports. It's essentially a 45-minute meeting with someone from staff. We offer those appointments virtually and in person. So here you can see the upcoming dates. Um, if you're looking at this and you're like, I'm not available any of those times, I don't know what to do, no problem. Please get in touch with me and I will make sure that we can find a time for us to chat. Before I turn to other questions, Zoe, is there anything else you'd like to share with applicants as they potentially put together their applications?
Yeah, draft, draft, and draft again. The first iteration of my application honestly was not that great. A few of the questions I think I was just rambling on, but I got great advice from a friend of mine was to not scrap the application, but actually just start in a new document. And weirdly enough, starting in a fresh document, listing out the questions helped me immensely and it kind of took the pressure off. So try to give yourself time to really digest what's being asked. Um, Another thing was always just have someone else read your application for you. If someone who's reading it can't concisely tell you what the project is about, and how it center social change, then you just have to go back to the drawing board. It's not the end of the world, but it just means that you have a bit more work to do. And the other thing is I do some grant writing outside of this, and just to remember that grant applications are really about storytelling and an ability to define your project clearly and concisely for audiences. And then just the last thing is to really think about why you're applying to Leeway specifically. I've been watching a lot of, unfortunately, Love Island. So if you're thinking about it in the realm of like dating, kind of like how are you both aligned with one another, and what can really come of this relationship? And if you know all of those things when you write your application, it will be great and you'll do amazing. And yeah, believe in yourself. And that's it.
Lovely, lovely advice, Zoe. Thank you so much. Yes, definitely have someone read your application for you, whether that's a member of Leeway staff or someone in your community, especially someone who is maybe not an artist or not engaged in these communities or kinds of projects in the same way. I think their perspective is particularly helpful. They can let you know if what you're describing is coming through or not, if it's understandable to them, right? So yeah, thank you so much, Zoe. I'm going to stop recording and open it up for questions.